Dear learners, welcome to this last segment of our discussion on history of Indian legal system. So today what we will try to understand it is the judicial domain. Today our focus will be on colonial judiciary and women's issues. So in this session, we will try to understand three broad aspects revolving around the judicial sphere. First, before we take the case of colonial judiciary, we need to understand the relevance of judiciary itself. Second, we will try to understand the structure of colonial judiciary. How did the judicial system evolve during the colonial period? And third, we will try to understand the attitude of colonial judiciary towards women. Judiciary as a space, it is a very interesting as well as important space for the sustenance of democracy. For strengthening democratic values, judiciary acts as one of the strongest pillars. We know it well. We are familiar with this idea. So, and there have been a number of researches conducted on the functioning of judiciary, both in colonial India as well as in independent India. We need to understand this, that it is not only the attitude or the attitude of the judges, be it in the colonial period or in the post-independent period, but it is also the architecture which has been a subject of research. And because what kind of space, physical, infrastructural space is there or had been there in the past when we talk about this adjudication of disputes, when we talk about dispensation of justice, because judiciary is there as the upholder of democracy, constitutionalism, law and justice. We know that it is the independent branch of governance. Independence of judiciary is a unique feature of our democratic setup, and thereby it keeps a check on the powers of legislature and executive. When it keeps a check, then it also prevents abuse of power. So here, what do we need to understand? That when we analyze this judicial space from colonial to the post-colonial period, we find transformation in the role of judiciary in the colonial period, and this transformation is something crucial. It is important to understand, to be made clear. So in the colonial period, legal system, and which obviously included courts as well, aimed to sustain colonial rule. The objective was law was used as an apparatus to sustain colonial rule, to provide strength to the imperial project. So colonial judiciary, when it comes to the way it functioned, we do not find uniformity here. It is full of diversity, it is full of complexity as well as ambiguity, because there were multiple interests, there were multiple stakeholders involved, and there were different types of people coming to the court. So the court adjudicated, and we know it well when we discuss the codification of law, in the colonial India, because here we are on the last segment of our first module, and this first module is the history of Indian legal system. So we know it well that the objective of codification was to gain familiarity with multiple Indian legal traditions, because the rulers were not familiar with us, with our laws, and the laws were not in the languages which they were acquainted with. So first they tried to learn the languages, and then the entire task of translation began. So here we need to understand this thing, that when people came to the judiciary, when people approached judiciary, it was not an easy or a uniform process. It was full of complexities. Judiciary also evolved itself. Judicial officers, judges, people who were responsible, who were made accountable, they were also learning the process. So we see that with reference to the protection of interest of the natives, of the indigenous people, including women, we find that the special focus was on the protection of the interest of elite, of the upper class of the society, of the upper strata of the society. Because often there was this conflict of interest, and in case of conflict, we find it in different case laws and different researches that based itself on the judicial decisions, that protection of elite interest was there. One finds it in different instances. Coming again to the post-colonial period, when we come to the judicial space that got constructed and reconstructed after independence, we find that now judiciary is there as the custodian of democratic values, and it provides space for social engagement, for reason, for dialogue, for intersection of multiple viewpoints, different viewpoints. So differences are not only coming to the judicial space, but are also being dealt, are addressed in different ways. And we find evolution in the approach of Indian judiciary in post-independent period as well. A number of recent interventions, especially in the Supreme Court, carried out and these initiatives had the objective of bringing more inclusivity, such as the task of translating the judgments from English to other regional languages, because English is obviously not being understood by the majority, by the masses. And then we come to this idea of live streaming. So post-COVID, this was being done, live streaming of the court's proceedings, so that common people can also get an insight into the judicial spaces, what happens there. We often remain curious. So now you must have come across those videos where arguments are being made within the judicial space, within the four walls of the judiciary. In 2022, this is also one major initiative. And why are we discussing it all? Because it is taking us forward to the issue of relevance of judiciary. So Supreme Court of India undertook the task of accessibility audit to ensure inclusion of people with disabilities within the four walls of courts. And these can be lawyers, these can be clerks, different other people, different other stakeholders who have different types of impairment, visual impairment, hearing impairment. So how can they be made, part of the judicial space? Then as a result of this audit, court released the report. The title of the report is A Court for All, Paving the Way for Accessibility. The space, because the space is there as the upholder of justice, as the upholder, protector of the rights of all the people. So the first condition is this only, that the space must be accessible. If I'll not be able to access it, then how will I get my rights protected? So based on the audit, to map out, the objective was to map the physical and digital barriers for persons with disabilities, senior citizens, pregnant women, etc. All these developments reflect the change in the approach of Indian judiciary. This change is very important and we need to understand it. It plays a crucial role and it tells us, how are we moving forward, in which direction are we moving forward. So, colonial judiciary has also undergone gradual developments, not only in terms of structure, but also in terms of its approach of dealing with the issues that came to the colonial courts. So before coming specifically to colonial judiciary itself, we need to understand colonial administration, because judiciary is one of the parts of administration. And when it comes to the explicit governance, colonial officials had put efforts to gain familiarity, acquaintance with the multiple legal traditions of the natives. So the first step was through the process of codification of laws. In the later period, we find that through social reform movements, which we discussed, and we took 4 major initiatives, but then we had other such initiatives as well. Legal reforms were initiated because social reform movement, the object, the objective was to bring change. How? Through laws. And then in between we had the 1857 First War of Independence. And 1857 witnessed reassurance of the same policy that was there, that was, present from the beginning, but this reassurance of the policy of non-interference. Where will they not intervene? Into the religious beliefs and personal matters of Indians, also referred as natives, indigenous people. However, this explicit declaration was there, but we had judiciary, we had courts, and courts through series of judgments on different issues. Obviously, courts did not have a single issue in front of them. They, even today and then also, during that period also, the courts had the task of dealing with multiple types of issues. So, through the series of judgments, alterations were made. Sometimes these alterations were, and the implicit ones, the subtle ones, into the social norms and the dominant practices of the society. We know it well that law has there are different sources of law. We have, and then one of the sources is judicial precedent. Judicial precedent is, it covers this idea that the judgments given by the higher courts are of significance when the subordinate courts are going to deal with similar nature of issues. So when a particular case comes before the court, then the court also tries to see that on the same issue, how and what kind of approach was adopted by the higher courts. So that we know then the judicial decisions given by the higher courts become crucial, as subordinate courts need to refer to those judgments, to those judicial decisions. So it has been documented that the colonial administration, through series of judgments, aimed to strengthen its authority and rule over colonized people, because there have been a number of research in the field of colonial legal history where this idea came out that the objective was strengthening its rule, and how both the content and the practice of law as an apparatus, and when we say law as an apparatus has been used by the colonial officials, rulers, it means both the content of law and the practice of law. And for the practice of law, we need to go to this particular body which we know as judiciary. The next important idea, that how did it evolve? So we did some of it, we have already covered when we were trying to understand the legacies of colonial legal system, because we know that there are continuities and discontinuities. Some of the ideas we have tried to counter, tried to challenge. So the entire project discourse on decolonialism is also there, but then we do have some continuities. Continuum is there. As pointed out by Martin Faber, the establishment of colonial courts in particular marked the ultimate appropriation of a territory, expanding control over the colonized people. The Regulating Act of 1773, we know it well, that how by this Regulating Act by the King of England established Supreme Court of Judicature in Calcutta. And then we have Supreme Courts in Bombay and Madras in 1800 and in 1823 respectively. After the establishment of Supreme Courts, we got High Courts. Indian High Courts Act 1861, which created High Courts in Bombay, Calcutta and Madras. And through the High Courts, Supreme Courts and Southern Courts got amalgamated into one, or we can say were not there, got abolished and then replaced by the High Courts. Passage of Indian High Courts Act 1861 led to the amalgamation of Supreme and Southern Courts, and the jurisdiction and the powers of both the amalgamated courts being transferred to the new High Courts at each presidency town. Under this act, except the 3 presidency towns, a new High Court was established. Where? In Allahabad. So the Allahabad High Court, when you try to understand its functionings, when you go to the archival records, you will find that it got established during colonial period. The Judicial Committee of the Privy Council, which has served as the Supreme Appellate Court of the British Empire since 1833. It got established in 1833. And it is also referred as the Imperial Court. Then we also have Federal Court of India, which was set up in 1937. and it continued to be the supreme authority of the Indian judiciary until independence. And we have this present Supreme Court of India, which replaced the federal court. So we got the highest court of appeal got established, the Supreme Court of India. The third aspect that we need to understand here, we covered relevance of judiciary as a particular space which is there within our reach, which is a very important independent organ of the governance, which is there as the protector of the rights of people, and it also deals with the governance mechanisms. And the second thing that we understood here in this particular segment, it is about the colonial judicial structure. How did it evolve, and what did colonial judiciary actually do? And third is this entire discourse on women and colonial judiciary. So when we talk about colonial judicial administration, we see that cases relating to different issues came before the colonial judiciary. Some of these issues were women's issues, and these issues related to adoption, property, marriage, divorce, inheritance, dower, etc. In addition to understanding the ways in which women's issues were adjudicated by the colonial courts, we also have another major concern, and that is the presence of women within the legal domain during colonial period. We will do it later, we'll take it forward, this idea of presence of women within the judicial space in the contemporary period as well. We'll try to understand it, because when we say judiciary as the upholder of justice, of the democratic values, as the upholder of constitutional values, we know that the presence of different interests, different sections of the society must be there. Because so that the voices can be heard, the voices are represented, first representation and then can be included and heard. So when we talk about this idea that as lawyers, how were women made part of the legal domain? How did they exercise their rights, or not just leave the case of rights, how were they present? How did they enter into that domain? So we know that as lawyers within the court, women had to struggle hard to create a space of their own. And this is well evident when you go to the story, when you go to this entire narration of Cornelia Sorabji's legal journey, who secured first place in Bombay Presidency final examination in 1887 and studied law at Oxford and was admitted to the bar in 1923. But she had to put great efforts to be accepted as a lawyer in Allahabad High Court. Allahabad High Court said that on reconsideration, when this entire case was being put forward, then on reconsideration, it was felt that it would be an impediment of an Indian High Court to admit women to the rolls before England had given the lead. So we see that this is a long journey, struggle, and finally we find that Cornelia Sorabji was admitted and she got entry into the legal domain. So this presence, we will, because we were discussing colonial India, so we did this small part here, we discussed it here. but then we will take it into details in the next coming sessions. Both women's presence in judiciary also and in the in advocacy as well. So, how did colonial judiciary deal with women's issues? So, for that we'll have to go to the judicial pronouncements. We'll have to go to different cases, and we have a number of case laws dealing with women's issues during colonial period. And we know that these judicial pronouncements made subtle alterations to the social structure, redefining social norms. There are multiple instances where it was recorded that colonial judiciary altering social order, it altered the social order, and the social order was earlier marked with fluidity, multiple and fluid legal Indian traditions. One can take the case of Devdasis. There are a number of examples, but we do not have, we always have this paucity of time. So we'll take one by one, and here we'll take the case of Devdasis only. So Devdasis, we find that these are the women dedicated to temples. They have their own practices in a particular southern region of the country, different states where the practice was there. So initially courts, when their issues came before the court, colonial courts, so what had happened that initially courts were reluctant to acknowledge their customary practices, because Devdasis, they had their own customary practices in relation to inheritance, transfer of the property and marriage related laws. So we have different set of laws for them. So initial reluctance was there to acknowledge their customary practices by the colonial courts, and this initial reluctance later transformed into criminalization of the practice itself, which is important for us to understand. We see that colonial courts have contributed in reinforcing the Victorian ideals of companionship, of marriage, as they were not considered respectable in colonial perception and did not fit well in their Victorian perception of morality. So what do we see? That immorality of the profession, immorality, when I say, then it is obviously full of contestations, which acted as a huge restraint in the acquisition of rights, in their acquisition of rights. So we need to understand that how the scope of their rights, of the rights of a particular community, of a particular group of women, which they were exercising those rights, but the colonial intervention made it difficult for them to exercise the same set of rights. Another intervention is the introduction of the concept of reversioners in the Hindu laws. So here what had happened, that the cases relating to property, and here the property of the widows, Hindu widows, reveal the fact that most of the time disputes arose between widows' power to alienate, widows' power to, give the property to anyone in whatever forms, and reversioners' power to inherit the same property. So the state, the property belonged to the deceased husband here in this case, and through the widow's act of alienation, because if widow is alienating it, is giving it to someone else, then reversioners' interest was threatened. And most of the case laws which were brought to the court were by the reversioners. Why? Because reversioners challenged the alienation of the particular property made by the widow. In such cases, legal necessity was proved to be an important clause for exercising right to alienate the property. Here it is important to note that the interest of reversioners held more significance in the eyes of colonial courts rather than the interest of women, widows. It is noticeable that the introduction of the concept of reversioner, property will revert back to the male heirs of the deceased husband. So this concept was introduced, it was a English legal principle, and it was introduced by the colonial courts in the Indian legal system, and it bestowed upon the male relatives the right to challenge the property dealings by the Hindu widows. So I hope it is understandable, and this was a glimpse into the functioning of the colonial courts and the impact of the decisions on women, on the status of women in India at that time. Thank you so much.